A major Bitcoin trader just had a huge trade over the weekend, but the timing was very fishy, all connected with a recent tweet or truth from Truth Social of Donald Trump, which makes you believe, is this an insider manipulating the Bitcoin price so the United States could buy more Bitcoin? Or is this connected to Larry Fink in any way, shape, or form? We're going to dive into all of this. But first, let's review what happened on Friday that was actually very, very shocking. So here's a great tweet that lines out the timeline of events. Look, I'm just going to line out a timeline of events. Do with that information what you will. But a new crypto wallet was created on Friday. It started shorting the market with Bitcoin and Ethereum shorts just before Trump's post about tariffs, knowing that this would crash the market. Now, Trump posted this, and the last short was placed literally a minute before the last Truth Social post. Now, I don't know about you guys, but me, I don't think that there's a lot of coincidences in life. I don't think that this guy or gal got very lucky. I think that there was some insider knowledge here that just allowed this guy to make millions of dollars in just a few short hours. But there's also this connection here, which is very interesting, where Trump is reportedly one of the largest Bitcoin holders in America. So would he want to manipulate this price, knowing that potentially force some additional sellers, and then he's manipulating that price down so either the United States government could buy more or he could buy more? It's all connected here, folks. So there's a huge, massive wipeout here. And it's interesting because if you look around the room, everybody else is buying. Now, let's get into this tweet, just breaking it all down just on how much was wiped out. I found a couple good sources. Of course, the guy with the crazy haircut, Luke Mikic, had his own opinions in there, but there was a $20 billion wipeout the other day, and it was 20 times bigger than the $1.2 billion liquidation event from the cerveza sickness. Now, the crazy thing about all of this is that we aren't talking like this is something close to, when the entire world government shut down. No, no, no. This isn't when the entire economy shut down or anything further along those lines. Not so fast. This is just simply Trump posting about tariffs and the market becoming extremely reactionary. So it makes you think, why is this the case? How did they know this information? And why isn't it more freak out? It seems like everybody just realized, oh, it was Friday, it was over the weekend, it's not a huge deal. But Bitcoin is still holding strong at that $110 mark, $110,000 mark, excuse me. So October and Q4, which everybody knows is Uptober. We'll get into that here in a minute. But that just began in Q4. Everybody was anticipating a huge run up towards the end of this year. So leverage traders are absolutely wiped. BlackRock buys 45,000 more Bitcoin, 100 days of supplies. But these trading gurus are still going at it. And friend of the program, Rob from Bitcoin News, went over that this is the largest liquidation event in crypto history. Look, I don't like the word crypto, but this is entailed for multiple of these coins, which, Bitcoin, because it is the apex predator, the largest of all of these, well, it makes you think, right? How big is the Bitcoin market comparatively? And if these small altcoins were coming, there hasn't been that quote unquote altcoin season. So when we're looking at it, I think I just view it as the overall Bitcoin industry. But either way, 19 billion in positions were wiped around centralized exchanges. 1.6 million traders liquidated. Bitcoin fell 13%. But, of course, we've seen a lot of altcoins fall off. And the headline was to point to Trump's 100% tariff threats against China as the catalyst. But in reality, this leverage built up in the system made a rapid collapse. Like, this is inevitable. And so that open interest hit 100 billion, and you've seen the meme coin craze simply fizzle out here. But the losers run out of margin. The exchanges have liquidated them. So these rapid spikes downwards and upwards, it dropped that open interest to 65 billion in a day. So it might suggest that this is some sort of coordinated attack. One whale opened 9 figures worth of shorts just minute before the cascade began. And he closed 90% of his shorts and ETH, locking in nearly $200 million of profit in 24 hours. So this was all seemingly coordinated because they saw a hole in the market. This isn't something where we could do the Wall Street bets type of thing where we get a bunch of retail. No. This is now one giant whale who is getting in on the action and making hundreds to $200 million worth of short profit here in a very short period of time. So it makes you think, who was it? And did they have some sort of inside information? If you ask me, it seems like the inside information had to be there because with everything going on, I mean, if you finalize the last short literally 1 minute before this scheduled post, well, I mean, we're lining out a timeline of events here, folks. So as we keep going through this, 11 billion in Bitcoin open interest was cleared. Every major leverage flush like this was in 2020, 23, reset the market back downward a lot more. Now, the positive coming from all of this is that even though we saw this massive amounts of liquidation, what we have been seeing is massive amounts of buying that have been propping it up. Now, of course, we've got the Giga Chad himself, Michael Saylor, buying Bitcoin. And if you look, the average buy per coin was at 123,000. So now he's underwater on those recently acquired coins only. But they were buying during this time, which I think is interesting. And if you look at the new spot Bitcoin ETF, 1 billion in the first 10 minutes here as we open today. So what is that showing you? That these guys who are coming in have extreme conviction and are now starting to buy up. When they see these dips, the downward pressure is being scooped up by all of these buyers, which is different. Now, of course, we always say this cycle is different in Bitcoin, but the evidence here is showing that it truly is. If you look at the on-chain data, well, let's line it out. We have a massive amounts of shorts liquidated, larger than we've ever seen, yet we see Bitcoin fall about 12%. Granted, that is a big movement if you look at stocks and all of these others, but in reality, this for a Bitcoin dip, not too much. So as we see this massive amount of spot Bitcoin ETF volume coming in today, I think we're going to see some OGs start to come back because this woke up a Bitcoin sleepy OG who deposited 300 Bitcoin after this. He moved 159 Bitcoin to a new wallet a year ago, but didn't sell. So he originally withdrew from Mt. Gox 13 years ago when Bitcoin was just $11. So this recent movement awoke a sleeping giant, to say the very least. Now, I'm not saying that this sleeping giant was Donald Trump, but it seems like with the evidence lining out here that this sleeping giant has some sort of information regarding what could potentially happen here with Donnie T. Because his tweet just a minute before we see this massive amounts of liquidation. Now, everybody on the headlines is going to be saying, hey, it is the tariffs, the Trump tariffs, the double T's, right? That's what everybody's equating this to. But if you take a look beneath the hood, like we did with Rob's tweet earlier, this volume and pressure was there well before we had this massive liquidation event. So we're going to keep going and diving into this. So make sure you guys are smoking that like Cheech and Chong for me, and hitting the subscribe button if you're not already. But these $19 billion of crypto liquidation in this 100% tariff event, it's not all because of that tariffs. Trump released that, right? And then said, pulled back immediately, right? So a single policy threat. Oh, everything that they want to equate things to is just black and white. But if you look at the reality of the situation, that is not the case, right? I mean, there was massive amounts of shorts and liquidation or short volume that has been stacking up on all of these centralized platforms for quite some time. So if we keep on keeping on with this, we're going to be seeing that these 19 billions in shorts are going to continue to rise up. So despite this turmoil, they held steady levels, like everybody was saying. And of course, we've got the altcoins suffering the biggest loss, with ETH at the number one, Bitcoin at number two. Of course, it's got the most to lose. But if you look around the block, everyone else, comparatively to their market cap, suffered significantly more than Bitcoin. And this is why it should be Bitcoin and Bitcoin only. I mean, you guys might be ripping me in the comments, but we're going to get into more of how I think this October is going to be different, and it's maybe shaking out some of the initial hands here in a minute. But as you guys know, when you see these dips, you don't want to sell Bitcoin. You want to buy more. So when you look at these dips and you look around the overall space, you're asking yourself, why are people selling, right? You see this open shorts volume. These shorts have been getting absolutely crushed. So it's Bitcoin on sale. You see Giga Chad Michael Saylor buying at 123,000. So you got to ask yourself, if a big money guy like this is buying, if the ETFs and Larry Fink are buying and stacking 450 or 4,500 Bitcoin in a single day, literally, these dips are manufactured to allow Wall Street and these big dogs to come in and get more Bitcoin. So why should you sell your Bitcoin to these big dogs? Well, in my eyes, I don't think you should. So you should go to saltlending.com/green-candle to borrow against that to open up some liquidity. So if you want to do that, they're giving an exclusive offer to Green Candle listeners here today. So if you go to saltlending.com/green-candle, you can get their salt shield. So you don't have to worry about that liquidation risk when you see some of the downward pressures. But they also have some of their best rates in the industry, starting at 8.95% with a duration of 12 months. And they let you borrow up to 70% LTV. Now, this is amazing because if you sit back and really look at what is going on here, you should I mean, the average person is going to be worried about some of that liquidation risk. I mean, look at 5 million worth of liquidation here recently, but I don't think that this is going to be the end of October here, right? So I don't think that this is going to be the end of October. Everybody thinks that, hey, you know what? We're done. Hang it up. Let's get super reactionary here. But just because of one day of plunging, it got off to a hot start. And that meme, Uptober, everybody's been worried about, oh, you know what? At the end of the day, hey, this is going to be something that is not going to come through. We think Q4 isn't going to be as bullish because we just saw a recent sell off. There's going to be so many of these different, white, I guess, black swan type of events. Q4 isn't going to be as good as we normally see. I mean, Q4, the average is 80% nearly, right? The average return in Q4 in these next 3 months is 80%. So we saw a little bit of that sell off. And Mick in the chat is asking, why can't the whale be identified? Because you can get wallets and non-KYC initially. So, there are ways to avoid that. So the whales can be, I guess a little bit hidden here. And the trade information is private too as well. So if whales can pump and dump Bitcoin, Bitcoin is not safe, as I have been believing. Other assets are worse, though. So, TF, you are 100% right here. I mean, there are whales that are coming alive, right? And pumping and dumping. And I think that, this whale activity is something different. I think that it reflects more of a sustained confidence because if a whale, a big giant player, is selling off Bitcoin, let's say, as we have seen, and these pump and dumpers, these traders are really coming onto the scene, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, why isn't Bitcoin seeing the 30-40% drawdowns that we used to see in this market? Well, it's because the buying power is still there. Everybody wants to be scooping up more Bitcoin. So it's not necessarily the fact that, okay, we're seeing this buy pressure and we're seeing this sell pressure increase. As McLovin is saying, Bitcoin was $16,000 3 years ago. So if we keep seeing the buy pressure increase like we are, well, it's just a matter of time. As my buddy Luke is always saying, right? There's 4,000 or there's 450 coins put into circulation literally every single day. And if you look at the amount of Bitcoin on exchanges, that chart, well, we see some Bitcoin get put back on exchanges here fairly recently by that whale onto Binance. But then, Bitcoin immediately 1,000, 10,000 coins just immediately get taken off, right? So even though people have been putting them back on, the buying pressure is just going to be a little bit slower than those selling pressure, right? So if you really take a step back and look, okay, these whales could be potentially buying, but there's a lot of them that got in. I mean, this guy on Binance, for example, was buying Bitcoin when it was $11. So, hey, sue the guy for wanting to sell off at 111,000, opposed to just waiting at some point in time. So I'm sure he's scraping a little bit off the top and just living in a beautiful island or something like that. And to be quite frank, do you really blame the guy? Do you blame these whales for coming in and buying early and making these trades? So 163K is only 10x from that bottom, and I agree. I actually think that this is pretty bearish, but it started off as a bullish note, and market analysts suggest that there's very little exchange activities despite the whale's recent fall in price. Now, this is where I agree with all of the narrative that if you look at, let's call it retail. Retail still isn't here buying just yet, right? It's the ETFs that are continuing to stack. We see massive amounts of inflows over time, but we saw this recent drawdown because I think retail's just kind of consistently buying. And all of these guys, right? If you take a step back and look at these big players continuing to stack, I mean, look at these treasury companies coming on. Like, you guys who have been coming to this for quite some time, I've been tracking all of these buys. And to be honest, this was less than 1 million coins not too long ago. So that buying pressure has just continued. And the amount of publicly traded companies coming on, it's like literally one almost every other day, sometimes more. We have 20 new entities in the last 30 days. And these ETFs buying, these guys coming in, they are big dogs, right? ETFs at 1.5 million, publicly traded companies at 1.05 million, just about. And, the governments are still stagnant. These private companies, well, we don't know fully just how many private companies are buying. And that's where I think things are going to start to get interesting, because as we start to see these Bitcoin and, whales start to come in, like, these market events like Scott Bessent saying that China-US relationship is good, the new 100% tariffs, quote, do not have to happen. The more that we see these headlines start to come out, the less that they'll affect the overall market in Bitcoin. Now, we might see, like you said, I mean, we're still in a fiat-based system, so we still may see these drawdowns at the 12-ish% in some of these, others. But, we're seeing things like this. The Europe's largest asset manager buying these Bitcoin ETFs and really starting to buy on. And so more of these products are starting to come on. And we're seeing gold absolutely rip. And we see things like, Scott Bessent saying things like this, or Howard Lubnick, excuse me.
Because if I don't ask you, everyone will be really mad at me.
If you took my stake in my public companies, which is public, and you did the public math, you'd see a couple of $1 billion.
Okay.
And then at least a couple of $1 billion. And then you'd have, what's Cantor worth? Yeah, I'm not saying. Okay. But things are good for me. How about that? Is that a nice way to say it? Since Cantor owns the stakes in the other companies, it's good for me. So, and I have
the percentage. You don't have to say exact number, but like, how do you think about either you or Cantor?
I don't have a big enough percentage. I probably have, no, I can't say because then people can figure out that no, how much I have. I would say I have hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay.
So he has hundreds of millions of dollars located in these things. And so he's saying even when Bitcoin dips, he's going to be a buyer. And that's the Treasury Secretary with all of this, right? So that's where I think it's interesting because, hey, he's saying verbatim, oh, well, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars in these Bitcoin products at Cantor. You can't figure out the exact numbers, all this and that. But this timing is very unique, right? So even though we have Trump coming in and saying all of these different aspects, he wants to be the first Bitcoin president, the timing of all of this is very, very unique, where you got to ask yourself, okay, well, if this timing happens and it's literally 1 minute before, you got to ask yourself, all right, what does Scott Bessent know? What does Howard Lubnick know? All of these guys are connected to the TradFi markets. So if they're connected to these TradFi markets, if they see, these guys coming in, well, it's something very interesting, right? It's something lining out here. So, I mean, either way, Bitcoin and cold storage is the way, and that's going to be continuing to rise up. And, we're going to see Bitcoin essentially get put 450 new Bitcoin on the market literally every single day. Now, I have been mining Bitcoin here recently, and I'm going to keep doing so with my friends over at Simple Mining. You can go to simplemining.io/green candle today. Go visit that link. Check them out. We're going into Q4. They offer great tax benefits. So for those of you whales in the crowd here, I know many of you guys are watching, but they have depreciation and similar tax benefits similar to real estate. So if you guys are looking to get in and stack some Bitcoin, Simple Mining seems to be the way. So go to simplemining.io/green candle today because, as we see this price humming along at 114,000, this is something that you got to watch very closely, right? I mean, hey, 114,000, we see this dip, but we see Bitcoin holding strong, holding the fort. You guys love the meme here where that guy from that movie is yelling, hold, hold, hold. And that's where Bitcoin is. And you shouldn't be holding it on Bitcoin or holding it on these ETFs. TF is saying he went a little hungry here. And I think that, the reality of all of this is that we're going to start to see some movement and some price action get pretty interesting here Now, make sure you guys are smoking that like Cheech and Chong, hitting the subscribe button, telling a friend to tell a friend, and I'll catch you guys all at the next one.